She was about to take the beginning of the sermon. That would not be good for either of us. I invite you to join me in prayer. Emmanuel, God with us, we thank you for the blessing of the long-anticipated Christ child. Now that he has arrived, we are unsure of what is next. He has come to show us how to live in faith. He has come to redeem the world. He has come to bring new life to each of us. Help us, O God, to not only see Christ as your anointed one, but to follow in his path, growing in faith and becoming new beings of the light. Amen. Wow, it's been 6 months, as I mentioned earlier, 6 months of new life found here at South Main Chapel and Mercy Center. 6 months ago today, about 125 people gathered here in this sanctuary to start a new thing, a new church. There had been great anticipation for months leading up to the birth of this congregation. There had been monthly meetings, negotiations between different church councils, and even some fundraising, all with the hope that South Main Chapel would become a reality. 6 months ago today, we officially opened the doors. There were more questions than answers. What if we could not feed people weekly? What if some of our partners felt as if their mission with us had come to a close? What if someone broke into the church and stole stuff again? What if? There was a core of folks who remained steadfast in their belief that the hope and dream of South Main could be a reality. They were here morning, noon, and night, folks like Elizabeth and Wanda and Jim, Tom and Elaine, Caroline and Jordan and Kylie, Tom and Jan, and of course Kurt and Jean. Folks from the neighborhood saw South Main as a beacon of light, a beacon of hope, a beacon of new life. Tammy, Matt and Christy, Michael, Greg, Leslie, and Brandy all saw potential. All had a belief that South Main could bring new life to this Orville community. Could the birth of this church bring new life to this small portion of the world? Jesus had been born in Bethlehem to Mary and Joseph. And as obedient Jews, Mary and Joseph knew that Jesus had to be taken to the temple to be dedicated to God. Our gospel passage this morning tells the story of Mary and Joseph bringing Jesus to the temple to be presented, to be dedicated with the prescribed sacrifice of 2 turtle doves for his redemption. Little did they know what they would encounter upon entering the temple. And perhaps little did we know what we would encounter when we entered this place 6 months ago. As Mary and Joseph neared the temple, a man stood in the shadows watching. This man was Simeon, the old prophet. For years and years, he had waited every day for some sign that the Messiah was coming, the long-awaited Savior for Israel. That was his job, to wait. As the family neared the entry of the temple, Simeon stepped out to greet them. And when they came close, it was like he reached out and lifted the corner of the blanket covering the baby Jesus. And at once, he knew that he looked upon the Messiah with his own two eyes. God's promise to the people of Israel had been fulfilled. Simeon was overcome with joy. It was the moment he had been living for. He had a lifelong determination to live until he could look upon the face of the Christ who would save his people. Perhaps he was surprised to see the Messiah come as a newborn child. But when he looked upon that baby's face, there was no doubt in Simeon's mind that he had seen the Messiah. He asked Mary and Joseph if he could hold the baby, and the startled parents said, "Well, I guess so, but don't drop him." Simeon sang out in praise and thanksgiving to God, blessed Mary and Joseph, and I can picture it in my mind. He's standing there doing a Jewish happy dance. Anna, a widow of 84 years, was also in the temple that morning, and when she heard the ruckus that Simeon was raising over Jesus, she joined in as well. She was considered to be a wise and holy woman, and there she was singing out praises to God, sharing the good news that the Messiah had finally arrived. Perhaps it was a new day in the temple, a much anticipated day when the Messiah would come to bring hope and peace and God's kingdom to the people of Israel. Now, I suppose it's no big surprise that the birth of a child brings great joy to the world. 17 months ago, my daughter called early one Tuesday morning to say that she had gone into labor and was headed for the hospital. Now, I was supposed to be at a hospice board meeting that morning, but I skipped it, and I drove to Asheville to greet my new granddaughter. And I got to Mission Hospital in Asheville about 10:30 that morning and began the wait. Now, I didn't have to wait as long as Simeon, but it sure seemed like it. Around 5 that afternoon, Quinn Anna Grace was born, and I have to say, quite honestly, that my heart leapt with joy. She wasn't the Messiah, but her grandfather's heart did a happy dance right there in the waiting room. And a little later that evening, as I held her for the first time, I couldn't believe how lucky my daughter and Brandon were to have this beautiful baby girl. And I thank God for the gift of this precious child, and I realized that new life began not only for Quinn that day, but for all of us who love her and her parents. As I drove back to Anderson that night, beaming with joy and hope and love, I thought about how God blesses the world with new life every time a child is born. Perhaps God reminds us in the world that there is ongoing hope with every new life that comes. Perhaps the birth of a child is God's way of saying to us and to the world, I'm not giving up on you. I'm still with you. The new world was born when Jesus was born, the world of God's kingdom on earth to embrace and redeem all the peoples of the world, freeing them from bondage and oppression and conferring upon every human being the right to be fully human as a child of God. A baby was born in Bethlehem, and his arrival announced that the power of sin and evil had been broken, An elderly man and a wise old woman saw a helpless baby and knew at once that in this child lay the hope of the world. The hope of the world. The birth of Jesus announced a revolution to the world. And it wasn't the typical revolution with guns and war and winners and losers. It was to be a revolution of love, where love becomes the way we live and never die. Love where there are no losers, but only winners. In this revolution, all persons are to be treated as sisters and brothers, a radical idea in Jesus' day, as perhaps it is in our own. Willingness to give one's life for a friend, even for an enemy, is always called for. Love to the point of forgiveness is always called for. The birth of God's kingdom here and now, as Jesus proclaimed, was to bring new life to an old world. Simeon's life was complete once he had seen the baby Jesus at the temple. But our gospel story does not tell us what happened to Simeon after that day. And I wonder what Simeon might have thought and said if he had been around 30 years later and seen what his people did to Jesus. And I wonder if Simeon were living today, would he be tempted to take back the words he spoke? It seems like our world, taken as a whole, frequently doesn't act as if the world has seen God's salvation. Many days it doesn't seem that we have made much progress since Simeon's day. Here it is just after Christmas, but people have not stopped killing one another in the Middle East or any one of a dozen other places that we could mention. The poor and the hungry may have benefited from our holiday time generosity, but they will still be poor and hungry in the coming new year. People who are addicted to drugs and alcohol will still be hooked. Children in abusive families will still get hurt. Where is God's salvation to be seen? In what way has Christ's coming made any difference at all? Is there anything that our eyes have seen that would cause us to believe that new life in an old world is possible? Hard questions. But I think the hardest thing about Christmas is not the frantic pace of preparation. It's not choosing the right gifts. Heck, everybody in my family just wanted money. It's not even spending time with family members that you'd really rather avoid. The hardest thing about Christmas is what comes after. And I don't mean the credit card bills. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we celebrate. Christ is born. December 26th, we get up. We get out of bed. And has the world really changed? Our eyes may have seen, or at least caught a glimpse of, the salvation God has prepared for us, but it doesn't appear that the whole world was paying attention. Even as Christians, those of us who celebrate Christ's birth at this time of year, our eyes have seen, our ears have heard, our lives have felt the coming of God, and yet nothing seems very different. If we really believe that Jesus is the Christ and that his coming into the world has really made a difference, we have to ask ourselves, what have I done about that? Who have I told lately about God in my words or in my deeds? Have I been sharing with others what my eyes have seen and my ears heard? What do my actions say? Do my actions look like they belong to someone who belongs to God? Or to someone who considers God only a couple hours a week, like maybe Sunday mornings? When was the last time I stood up for what I believed was right, even if other people thought I was weird? When did I make a decision that I knew was God's choice for me, even if something else looked better from my perspective? Simeon saw the baby Jesus for just a few moments in the temple. He knew. He knew that new life, a new kingdom of peace and love and joy had been introduced to the world. And it was enough for him. His life was complete. Anna, she had been waiting in the temple for 84 years. And we don't know from the text if she actually saw Jesus, but when she heard Simeon's proclamation, she sang out with joy as well. Seeing and hearing about the baby Jesus was enough for these two old folks to know that their lives were complete. The Messiah, the Anointed One, had come. We too have seen and heard once again during the holiday season. The baby was born and placed in a manger. A multitude appeared in the sky and sang out hosannas to the shepherds. The star appeared and directed the shepherds to where they saw this baby, this new life for Israel and all of the world, lying in a manger. We know that some wise men show up from afar to offer gifts worthy of a king. All of that happened over 2,000 years ago. God's salvation for the world came as a baby. And it was enough for Simeon and Anna to simply see and hear about this new life. We, you and I, are the people to whom Christ has come. We're not the only ones, but we are among the ones. Our eyes have seen God's salvation, or at least hints and glimpses of it. We know that the world has come from God and that we will return to God. We know that Christ has come for the whole world and not just for those of us here at South Main Chapel. We have not only witnessed, but have been participants in the new life, God's saving work here at South Main Chapel. And if like Cindy, our time of death were approaching, would we be satisfied that we've done what we can? We don't have to do everything. We don't have to do what God has called someone else to do. But we do have to respond to what our eyes have seen and what our ears have heard and what our hearts have felt. God's Messiah has come into the world. It is our job to continue His work, to be His hands, His eyes, His ears, His feet. As I said, 6 months ago, we began South Main Chapel with more questions than answers. And some of those questions have been answered. But the biggest questions remain for each and every one of us. has new life really begun in me and in this place?